Hey there, and welcome to another episode of Alter Your Health. I'm Dr. Benjamin.
And I'm Dr. Susanna.
And we're both naturopathic doctors who support you in empowering you and how to optimize your health, reversing disease through whole food, plant-based nutrition, as well as mind-body medicine. So we were just going on and on without volume. So here we are starting the conversation again.
But I'm glad we did.
This time about urinary tract infections, how to prevent them, reverse them, treat them, think about them naturally.
And I'm glad we did, because we forgot to share our big announcement, which is that today, starting tonight, we are kicking off another whole food plant-based challenge. And this is the Terrain Revival Challenge, which we're super excited about. We're going to talk about the importance of our inner ecosystem to maintain the balance and homeostasis, to keep our bodies healthy, especially, even when people around us are falling ill or, sick with whatever the bug of the week is.
Yeah. We'll get into it tonight.
Yeah. But first, we have our weekly Medicinal Monday call here, which is not part of our whole food plant-based challenge. Those calls happen tonight. But yeah, we're talking about UTIs because that's what the community voted on this week.
So as I was already saying, but I was muted, I was saying how this information, as is all information, is not intended to diagnose or treat you. That's kind of a disclaimer, but this is supporting you in understanding what is at the root cause of maybe a UTI in this instance, because I think that our conventional understanding, and it really leads quite nicely into this germ theory, terrain theory kind of conversation that we're going to be having all this week in the whole food plant-based challenge. But oftentimes it's like, oh my gosh, there's an infection, throw some antibiotics at it, right? But a lot of people do have chronic recurrent infections. They're more susceptible to those urinary tract infections. And we know what happens when we treat bacterial infections, in this case, over and over again with antibiotics. First of all, those antibiotics can disrupt other parts of our microbiome throughout our body. But also, we allow those bacteria to maybe mutate and evolve and adapt. And then we have infections that are more difficult to treat. So it's important to think about what's causing this imbalance. And I was asking you, Susanna, what is causing this imbalance when we're talking about, in this case, urinary tract infections?
Yeah. So the most common bacteria that leads to a urinary tract infection is E. coli. And how E. coli infects the urinary tract is that it actually migrates from the rectum, where E. coli generally, E. coli can live in the rectum and not cause any symptoms. But once it migrates into the vaginal area and then finally to the urethra and then ascends up the urinary tract, that's when it can lead to a bladder infection. And if untreated, it can ascend even further up into the kidneys. Right. And so, really in this discussion, we're going to talk about, what kind of hygiene practices we can implement to prevent that migration of bacteria into the urinary tract. But we're also going to talk about really why is E. coli there and how might we actually be able to lessen or eliminate E. coli's, that specific strain of E. coli's presence in our rectum.
Yeah. So it leads you to kind of clearly understand that this is a microbiome imbalance sort of thing. And that E. coli, maybe it shouldn't be there in the first place. We've got various strains of E. coli in the lower intestinal tract, in the making up the intestinal microbiome. And yes, those intestinal microbiota should stay in the intestinal tract and should not leap into the urinary tract to cause infection, inflammation, irritation, and the symptoms associated with UTI. But really, if I hear you correctly, and I know I do because I know this stuff too, that the UTI symptoms are actually a result of intestinal microbiome imbalance or dysbiosis that translates and transfers over into the urinary tract.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And specifically, let's talk about how we can have those prolific populations of E. coli, the strain that infects our urinary tract.
Yeah.
Where does it come from in the food that we're eating?
Well,
Well,
where does it come from? Are you asking yourself? Or
well,
are you
I'm putting the
asking,
question out to the community.
where does the E. coli come from?
Yes, and here we are in our whole food plant-based podcast here,
Yeah.
where
Well, there's some good clear science indicating that the E. coli that is found in our colon comes from the E. coli that disrupts normal ecosystem and creates that dysbiosis and an inflammatory response that crosses over into the urinary tract. Those organisms generally come from chicken. And a lot of people think, oh, that's kind of gross. I'm going to just eat well done chicken, make sure it's deep fried and, non-contaminated and stuff. But it turns out that even well done, well cooked chicken harbors this microorganism, the specific strain of E. coli that tends to disrupt the microbial ecosystem of the large intestine and cross over and cause urinary tract infections in the individual.
Yeah, and actually what's happening is it's actually the chicken feces that is rich in E. coli. And then that contaminates the meat. And then we bring the meat into our kitchen, and that contaminates our surfaces, our faucet handles, our hands. The E. coli gets kind of everywhere throughout the kitchen whenever we're handling raw chicken, even if we're super duper careful, right?
And maybe for those plant-based eaters who might they're like, oh, well, I don't eat chicken. Maybe you went to a restaurant. Maybe you went to a barbecue and you didn't get a full-on E. coli overgrowth infection that caused, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and these sort of things. But it was the specific strain that can just have that kind of effect on the urinary tract.
Yeah, or maybe someone in your family still makes chicken, or maybe your roommates or whatever.
Yeah.
And also, even if we are eating totally whole food plant-based, the truth is that there can be other forms of cross-contamination of bacteria.
Yeah.
And but the point being, though, that whole food plant-based eaters definitely expose themselves to way, way less E. coli through the foods that they're eating.
And foodborne pathogens in all cases.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about E. coli here, which is far away the most common cause of urinary tract infection, but there's other organisms, it's important to point out, that can cause a urinary tract infection. Do you have any numbers or percentages in terms of what percentage of UTIs are due to E. coli? I want to say like 90%.
It's definitely the large majority, but I don't know off the top of my head. But yeah, this actually, when we first learned about the whole chicken thing, it was actually from Dr. Michael Greger, and he shares in his videos and articles that this handling of raw chicken is a big deal, and
raw meat in general, just meat in
yes
general. Yeah.
But he was saying how there was this study where they were testing the amount of E. coli in kitchens after raw chicken was prepared, after people had cleaned up, and they had one group clean up with just soap and hot water, and still E. coli was found everywhere, and then the other group wiped everything down with bleach, and E. coli was still found everywhere.
The interesting thing about the study is that the group was told, we are going to go through the kitchen with special equipment and look for the smallest amount of hidden pathogens on any of the surfaces. So they were told to completely disinfect this kitchen with Clorox bleach, and still a professional cleaning crew, I believe it was not able to make the kitchen chloral sterile, or kitchen environment sterile from the E. coli organisms.
Yeah. So this is not to make anyone, not to encourage any germophobia or anything like that. Because the good news is, when we eat whole plant-based, even if our to a little bit of E. we have so many other populations of beneficial bacteria in our gut due to our high fiber diet that we can easily crowd out and manage the amount of, the small amount of E. coli that we might be exposed to due to cross-contamination.
That's an important point, which kind of is a good little teaser for our terrain revival challenge that does start tonight. Yeah, so that's kind of the underlying cause of, like we said, maybe 90+% of urinary tract infections. And that leads to one of the most common natural treatments, right? Which is cranberry juice.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, are we there yet?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about like cranberry juice and these natural remedies and treatments and what they do and why they might help and why they might not help.
Yeah. And specifically why cranberry juice can be helpful in preventing UTIs and also, helping to clear UTI at the very early signs of infection is because cranberries are high in D-mannose. And maybe you've heard of D-mannose because you can also buy D-mannose in an extract form, in an isolated form.
For those unfamiliar, Dr. Susanna is saying D-mannose. D, the letter, it's like chemistry stuff, and then mannose, which is a polypeptide, a sugar, polysaccharide.
Yeah. And so what D-mannose does is it actually prevents E. coli from attaching to the walls of the urinary tract. So it's easier for your system to flush out the bacteria, considering that you're also hydrating really, really well.
Well, I've got this theory that for sure dehydration or a low minimally hydrated status definitely sets the stage for urinary tract infections. And most people are dehydrated. And when people are I've never had a urinary tract infection, but I could imagine that if I did, I would probably think, man, I'm going to hydrate. I'm going to drink water. I'm going to drink cranberry juice. I'm going to drink lemon water. I'm going to drink a smoothie. I'm going to drink a green juice. And just the act of hydrating in and of itself is very therapeutic for so many things, including our urinary tract clearing and cleansing itself. So I think because a lot of people say, oh, well, the D-mannose thing only helps those E. coli infections, like you were saying, which is like 90%. So yeah, if you don't have that E. coli, if that's not the root cause, drinking cranberry juice or anything for that matter, anything that's hydrating is going to support the body in clearing itself. And I think it's important to put in the caveat that a lot of the cranberry juice out there has a lot of added sugars and heavily processed, and it tastes really good. That's not the stuff that you want. The cranberry juice that we want doesn't really taste that good, isn't that sweet, that's for sure. You can probably sweeten it up with some, a little bit of honey or something like that, but you get the idea.
Yes.
Drinking stuff. Good.
Yeah. And it's helpful to know also that E. coli generally, let's say you had one exposure to it. It generally lasts in your rectum for about 10 days. And then it clears out on its own if you're not re-inoculating yourself with it. So that's also helpful to know that, it doesn't stick around forever. But a lot of people who have recurrent UTIs have chicken, every few days. So it doesn't really allow that time for the E. coli to naturally work its way out of the system. So so we talked about D-mannose. D-mannose can, that's probably the most popular supplement that's known for preventing, but also helping to clear a UTI in the early stages. And, we say early stages because, when you catch a UTI in an early stage, when you first notice symptoms and you really take hydration seriously and you bring in some of the helpful, nutrients like D-mannose, and then there's some other herbs that are also very well known, you can really clear it naturally. It's when the infection starts to ascend and cause those more severe symptoms that, you don't want to mess around, because you wouldn't want the infection to ascend to the kidneys, because, well, it's dangerous. It's
life-threatening, in fact. So I think that's probably the most important point. Don't mess around. don't mess around too much with the UTI stuff. Get on it early. And it's so cool as you're talking about it. Like I said, I've never had a urinary tract infection, but I was thinking about it and how we get this. We get this urge to drink more. I would think, and that message from the body, listening to the message from the body in that capacity, is so important, so helpful. And I know a lot of people. The UTI causes urgency and frequency of urination, and people are like, oh, and I've got to drink more, so I'm just going to be going to the bathroom all day. And yes, that's the point. That's what our body is trying to do. It's clearing stuff out. So yes, get a bottle next to your desk if you need to. Just kidding. But you'll probably be going to the bathroom more, which, yes, that's the point. That's important.
Yes.
So maybe it interferes with your daily schedule for a day or two, but then you're better, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. And so let's go back to the topic of also prevention, because prevention obviously is like the most important thing, right?
Especially for people who are have that recurrent tendency.
Yeah. And so we talked about the nutritional factor and the hydration factor, but there really is a big hygiene factor as well, especially if there is some amount of E. coli in the rectum that could migrate to the urethra.
And this is why men are not very susceptible to urinary tract infections until a more advanced age. And then there's different things at play.
Exactly.
So
hygiene becomes really important here. And so we basically want to take every measure we can to prevent any fecal matter from entering the vaginal area. And so, there's some really kind of common sense stuff, like make sure you're wearing clean underwear, but cotton underwear is better than synthetic because it's more breathable, and that having more oxygen in that environment can prevent certain strains of bacteria from proliferating.
That's true. Yeah, we're talking about anaerobic bacteria, which don't survive in the presence of oxygen.
Also, when menstruating, not using tampons is really helpful as well. Because if you think of the tampon, it's essentially like it can kind of act as this like wick in a way. I mean, it can allow bacteria to more easily travel into the vaginal area. So tampons, can also, that would be a helpful thing to replace with just a clean, organic, unscented pad. And also, generally people who are more prone to urinary tract infections, it's better if they stay away from any kind of chemical irritant as well, just to prevent any irritation to the urethra. So using unscented detergents for washing clothes and unscented pads and things like this can help. But really the biggest thing is, of course, wiping from front to back and not back to front. That is the biggest thing that most of us, it's like, well, duh, like we know this. But, honestly, as a little girl, it's like, I didn't learn that for a few years, honestly.
Did you have UTIs as a little girl?
No, I didn't, luckily, but
even with all your chicken nuggets?
Even with all the chicken nuggets or whatever. And then of course, just keeping in mind this good hygiene during sexual intercourse. And this is why it's really recommended that we urinate after sexual intercourse, because it really just flushes out anything that might have entered the urethra. So that's a really big one. And if people are super duper prone to infections, especially after intercourse, you could even take D-mannose as a preventative. Really the kind of preventative protocol I know is you can buy it as a powder, and doing like a half a teaspoon an hour before intercourse and a half a teaspoon an hour after. And that would also just, once again, help prevent the attaching of E. coli onto the walls of the urinary tract.
So earlier you talked about some herbs that are helpful for the urinary tract. Is that anything that you want to go more deeply into?
Sure, sure. And once again, this is not, we're not
Yeah.
treating anything here. We're just talking about herbs that are good for the
Yeah,
urinary
so
tract.
there are herbs that are antimicrobial in nature that kind of flush and cleanse bacteria in that capacity. And then there are herbs that are soothing in nature that kind of relieve the irritative sensation associated with UTIs. So some antimicrobial herbs.
Would be, well, uva ursi is a really popular herb for
It's kind
urinary
of
tract
both,
infections.
right? Uva ursi has some antimicrobial properties and is soothing. Equisetum is soothing and nourishing, not really antimicrobial, but that's horsetail. And then, there's like the berberine sort of herbs, like Oregon grape and
There's
hydrastis.
Yeah, I think about other herbs that are typically found in urinary tinctures, like plantain leaf, and also, why am I blanking on them? I had a few other in my mind. There's one.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh no, it's okay. I actually didn't brush up on the treatment of this, but
there are a lot of urinary teas out there that are like formulated, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another really interesting, this is more like a food-based urinary approach, is also to actually harvest the silk from corn.
Oh yeah, corn silk.
Those little hairs when you're shucking corn, and doing actually a cold infusion of that, and it creates a mucilaginous, very soothing beverage that it's soothing for the urinary tract when you consume that. So that's another one. But yeah, for some reason I'm blanking on all the different urinary herbs.
Licorice has that mucilaginous quality.
I could go look in a book right there. But anywho,
herbs.
So yeah.
And then leading back to that, oh yeah, I'm hydrating because that kind of mindful, nutrient dense, electrolyte, mineral rich hydration is so important for everything.
Yes. So let's see if there's anything else that I have here on my notes, and there's not
anything else.
Yeah.
So just a reminder that the Whole Food Plant-Based Terrain Revival Challenge starts this evening, and we're looking forward to it. If you don't know what the heck we're talking about, you can find out more at alter.health. And that's about it for now. Thanks for tuning in to another Medicinal Monday. We hope to see you hopefully maybe at Wednesday Wisdom Wednesday. And we'll see you guys next time.
Yes. Bye for now.
Take care.